what's really hard is that I would say they won just about as many games as they probably should have won last year. And I don't know how, like, you're going to have to subtract or do something funky in order to pave the way for the ability to deliver something that peaks at a significantly higher level. Sorry, I yelled at you.
Cubs fans, this is an exciting one. We got Boog Sciambi back on the show. It's his second time on the show. Boog, thanks for jumping on, man. You are the man. Thanks for being on here.
My pleasure. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too, man. So guys, just really quick to catch you up. I got a lot of, and Boog, just so you know, I always put out an opportunity for our listeners to ask their own questions, and we'll get to fan questions at the end. But a lot of people asking about, like, hey, tell me about the difference between national versus Cubs and how you do the broadcast style. So guys, we actually, Boog and I had a conversation about that on the last time that he was on. So I'm going to put the link to that interview in the description. If you want questions answered like that, go check that out. We also talked about, where his name comes from, the joys of being a Cubs broadcaster, Project Main Street, which a lot of you already know about. So go check that one out. But Boog, I want to get it started, man. You were, in the playoffs, in the World Series, second year doing the World Series. What's the offseason, though, looking like for you? Are you able to breathe now?
Yeah, definitely getting some time to sort of settle back in. Basketball will be headed my way very shortly. I am going to be recording for MLB The Show coming up. So nice. That's kind of what's next for me. But I would say, being plugged in on baseball stuff is a big part of it.
Do you ever have like people who play MLB The Show that come up to you at Wrigley and are like, hey, that's how I knew you first? Or do they ever make that connection?
Younger kids do. It's interesting. Or someone will say that their son knew my name. So and that honestly is something that's pretty cool, that if in some way I'm impacting some young kid's love of baseball, man, that's pretty special. So it's usually somewhat of a younger generation.
That's cool, man. So let's talk about, just before we get into Cubs stuff, second year in a row of doing the World Series. That's got to be a blast. Do you find yourself prepping any differently or doing anything different in game or post game for World Series stuff than you do for the rest of the season?
I mean, I think the one component is I've done the playoffs. It's on the radio, so it's slightly different. Right. So again, I think of it so much in terms of like the craft and the mechanics of it, and that first and foremost, even though we have our phones now, and I don't know what the future of radio is, I love the art of describing and that type of thing, and I still do the job the way it was originally intended, and that is that my audience can't see the game.
Yeah.
And so my main function is to deliver description, and then it follows with stories, nuggets, that type of thing. I don't think I prep differently. I will say this, that in today's world, prepping for the World Series when it's the Dodgers and the Yankees, it's like trying to reach the end of the internet. You know what I mean? There's just so much information, and you're trying to talk to so many different people. But I would say, as a general idea, it's the thing I always wanted to do, and getting to do it. I'm able to be, I'm grateful that I'm able to be present for it and really enjoy it. I'm able to sit there as I'm getting ready to do it and say, this is pretty amazing. So, and then you're at the center of the baseball universe. Everybody is there. You're, before games, I guess game 4 and 5, you're down on the field and you see Joe Torre, and then you bump into Ken Griffey Jr. and on. And it, there's hundreds of media people down on the field, plus the players, and you've seen so many of them. So at a certain point, I know Mookie pretty well. I know Freddie pretty well. Obviously on the Yankee side, I worked with Aaron Boone. So um, I think, and I worked with Jess and Eduardo, and that was a blast. And Buster, and it was great. So yeah, I loved it. It's an interesting, process going from, your TV at the beginning, for the Brewers and the Mets, and then move on to the radio. And I loved it.
One more World Series question, then I want to get into Cubs stuff. First year, right, was Rangers and Diamondbacks,
Right.
which is two teams you rarely see in the World Series. And then you got the Yankees and the Dodgers. Which one, from your perspective, being the only two that you've actually covered, was, I guess, the word special or exciting? Like, which one was just more fun, I guess?
I can't, you know what? Because I've only done two and they both went 5 games. Look, the first one was special because it was my first
Yeah.
one. And, because of Freddie Freeman, most people don't remember, but, Seager tied game one of the 2023 World Series
Right.
with a home run. And then Adolis Garcia won it with a walk-off in extras. That's pretty cool. And
Yeah.
then game one the next year, Freddie Freeman, the walk-off grand slam. I mean, I in terms of the magnitude of the matchup, it's Dodgers and Yankees. I don't know that going forward I'm going to call a bigger one than that, unless you get some version of Dodgers, Yankees, Cubs, Yankees, where they're both monsters. But look, the first one was really special to me.
It's awesome, man. Well, I hope you keep on doing it year in and year out, and us Cubs fans get to hear your voice deep into October and November. Let's transition to Cubs now. The line down at the bottom, as you see, how do the Cubs get better for this upcoming year? I think the best word, there's two words that I've been using for this offseason. Number one, it's going to be confusing. I think one reason being you're either going to see a lot of things happen and a lot of people and players go that you weren't expecting to see, or you're not going to see much happen at all. And you're going to come back with a very similar team. And then the second word I've been saying is creative. Like, Jed has to be creative. And I think the best place to start with this is you were around for the entire playoffs. You see these teams, you see these organizations, just like you said, the players, a lot of the front office. What are the differences that you see from a Yankees and Dodgers organization right now compared to a Cubs organization?
Man, I thought you were going to ask me team, not organization. I don't
Well,
have.
yeah, I mean, team or organization, however you want to take that.
Well, I don't have as much of a glimpse into other teams as I do, the Cubs. I would say, look, these are the two monster franchises, and even though the Cubs, the Cubs have spent money. The Yankees have two aircraft carriers in Soto and Judge in the playoffs, and the Dodgers have three. And with all due respect, the Cubs have some really good players, but they don't have an aircraft carrier, man. And you even like Corey Seager's an aircraft carrier.
Absolutely.
That's one of the things that I would say that's different. I'm still stuck, and I don't know that there's a way to really determine what is the path. Like, how good do you have to be? Because the Diamondbacks at the end of the year in 2023, I'm watching them beat the Cubs, 6 out of 7 times in September. And the whole time it's happening, I'm saying, are they better than us? I'm not sure they're better than us. And then they're in the World Series. So how good do you have to be? Look, this year, the two best teams got there. Those two teams were the two best teams. I think that's what you want to build. So, look, if you want to build an 86-win team, I think you got a really good chance to get to the playoffs. Like, what's the goal? Do you want to try and win the World Series? If you want to try and win the World Series, then I think what Craig Counsell said is, yeah, you got to start building 90-win teams. You got to start building 90-win teams because then you overperform and you're a 95-win team. And now we're getting into that territory of the type of team that feels a little more in the neighborhood of hoisting that trophy. So, I think that there's a lot of stuff, and I think that you talked about creative. They are going to have to be creative because I think right now, they have prospect talent. They're going to have to make choices on going forward, which talent that is young and cost efficient to keep, and which they want to trade and use as value, as assets to be shipped off for players that they can hopefully, use to impact the big leagues. So it's tough. I think they're in a difficult spot. I really do.
I really don't envy Jed's position right now.
No.
I think you and I had a conversation last year at spring training, and you said to me,
Did
I
I
don't know if you
yell at
remember
you?
this. Yeah, you probably did.
I'm sorry.
I don't know if you remember saying this, but you said either way, this team is going to be really good in 2 or 3 years, and you were referring to the fact that they just have such a good farm system.
Yeah.
And I think at that time we were like, well, they're either going to get rid of a lot of those guys and get major league talent, or those guys are going to get called up and they're going to get playing time and they're going to turn into really good major league players.
Yep.
And I just figured that by the end of 2024, we would have more of a clear picture on that.
Yes.
Right?
Agreed.
Like,
Totally agree.
I figured Owen Casey would get some playing time. I figured Kevin Alcantara would get more than 10 at bats. I figured that Cade Horton would be up there, but he got hurt, and Ben Brown got hurt. So there were some things out of control, but I don't feel any clearer on that.
I agree. But what I would say back to you, and I know the fans were, but where was Kevin Alcantara going to play? Where was Owen Casey going to play?
Exactly.
So, like, that's part of the problem in terms of what is just where this roster is right now. I don't know how you get those extra, I mean, look, if you're building, a 90-win team, it looks like, 7 extra wins if you want to be. I mean, I think again, this is stupid to say. I'm fine saying stupid stuff. Look, with what the Cardinals are doing right now, and even despite what the Brewers did, I would say that if they're able to build an 87-win team or an 86-win team, they should be right in the middle of it for the division next year. But that's not total. I do feel as though, and it's not going to be this year, I do feel like because of their resource advantage, if run that, I think that they should. It's not easy. I do think that because of the resource advantage, it would seem like they have an ability, you know, to eventually become kind of like the Dodgers in the Central.
I mean, I think we as fans would all love that. I think the difference, and we don't have to play the whole like comparison game, but we kind of do, because all that the Cubs fans really have over the last multiple decades is to compare it to 2016, and 2012 started this very clear, we're rebuilding, just be patient with us.
Mm-hmm.
And then it seemed like that was going to be the same thing in 2021. Hey, we're getting rid of all the big guys. This is rebuild. But then it's like, and you hear Patrick Mooney and Shahdev Sharma talk about this on Northside Territory a lot. It's like Jed kind of just said, no, it's not a rebuild. We're going to try to win during the rebuild too. And then you saw guys like the Tucker Barnharts, the Trey Mancinis, the Eric Hosmers, all those kind of come in when it seemed like that could have been an era that we learned a lot about organizational guys. For example, Christopher Morel, instead of 2024 testing him out at third base, felt like we could have tested him out at third base in 2022, 2023, but that never really happened. So I almost feel like Jed is kind of caught in this middle of like, hey, I want to win, but also like we built up this great organization. So how are we going to find time?
The other part that I would say that's challenging, and as someone that gets to kind of view all of it, the fans and the media operate in the same space. The fans and the media didn't want to do rebuild. I mean, like, man, there's still a
For
part of
sure.
me that wants to go around and find the surveys of all the people that really wanted them to extend Baez, Bryant, and Rizzo, and just put them all in a room and be like, how do you think that would look right now?
Oh, for sure.
But I'm saying and then to really stink again, people would have hammered them for it. So he was in a really tough. It was a tough spot, and I like the thing I always say about everybody wanted they wanted you two to make the Joshua tree again. They didn't want the Cubs to win the World Series again. They wanted them to win the World Series again with the same dudes.
Yeah.
And I get it, but it's so now, yeah, they did kind of stick in the middle a little bit, and now you're in a place where your roster is kind of stuck. And I think that if they're going to really find a path, the most likely path is going to be via trade.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and I think there was that little glimmer of hope of Cody Bellinger opting out and having $27.5 million available to you. And right. I heard it on one of the other podcasts recently. It was said really well. We keep talking about, the fans keep talking about, I wish Cody Bellinger would have opted out, almost like he's a bad player. He's not a bad player. A year ago, we were all begging for him. Yeah. A lot of fans were begging for him and Scott Boras and Jed to get together on a 7-year, $200 million deal. And that would have been not good. But at the end of the day, that did limit a lot of what Jed can do this offseason. So when you look around the diamond, brother.
Well, hang on, pause for a second.
Yeah.
They can still, it's not like they can't sit there and trade Cody Bellinger and eat $15 million of it. The issue as far, with Cody is he basically was paid as the guy that performed in 2022. If that guy were showing up again next year, then it's a different story. The issue with Cody is he's a good player. There's positional versatility. You do not have very many guys that can play center, right, and first, and do it at average or above. But the issue is the number is that you can, and so you've got to find spots where you can get players to, overperform. And so part of the problem becomes, where are you going to get those, where can you get extra wins or overperformance? You're locked. I mean, right. If you keep Belly, you're locked in left, you're locked in center, you're locked in at right. Obviously, the kid in center looks very promising, and he's super cost efficient. You're locked in at short, you're locked in at second, talking contractually.
Right.
And then you don't want to get rid of the guy at first base because he's cost efficient.
Yep.
And now, I mean, you have the guy at third. I'm interested to see what the number would be in arbitration and, where the value is. But then, so what? You're going to try to find those 7 wins at catcher?
Yeah, it's not coming from there. Not with the free agents that are out there. And the trades don't seem to, you never know what's going on behind the scenes with the trades. But,
right.
And I think a good example of that is I don't think anyone thought that Jed was looking for a third baseman in the middle of the season, even though Christopher Morel was not performing as we all hoped he would. I remember getting that notification being like, oh, okay, we have our third baseman for the future. And then he played the way that he did. And I do still believe, I personally still believe that the track record for Paredes is going to speak louder than the 2 months that he played with the Cubs. So I'm willing to, as a fan, say, let's at least see what he can do up till the trade deadline. But to your point, when you as fans start trying to convince yourself, hey, we just have to make a trade to find out where we're going to get more wins. So I guess Nico makes the most sense, which a lot of people are talking about. And you're like, well, he's been second in WAR for each of the last 2 seasons on the team.
He's a really good player.
Yeah, he's a really good player.
So it's hard. I mean, so these things, by the way, one of the really good fun facts. Jed Hoyer's youngest son, favorite player, and his favorite birthday present this past year was a Christopher Morel Rays jersey. That's a true
Oh,
story.
wow. Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Favorite player, Christopher Morel, his youngest son. And for his birthday, he got a Rays Christopher Morel jersey.
Wow.
Yeah.
How about that? I
Which
mean,
when Jed told me that, I cackled. I mean, he laughed. He understand. Like, look, none of this is lost on Jed, right? It's just it's really hard. They will have to have some luck. Um, that's for sure. So I don't. Yeah, I'm not sure how this ends up playing out.
well, and fans are going to hate me for asking this question, but the reality is too, there were really three big anomalies in 2024 that if you were to even say, hey, if this just happened at half the rate that it did, you're
Hmm.
probably a playoff team. And I would say that would be injuries, which
Hmm.
a lot of the league experienced. So that's not an excuse, but it is
No.
still something that happened at an incredibly high rate.
The only
Um,
thing I would say with that, I mean, look, yeah, I get you. The problem there is that the number one team in games lost to injuries this past year
was the Dodgers.
won the World Series.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. The other factor was underperformers, and especially underperformers like all in bunches at just the wrong time, right? Like
Right.
Nico, you look at his numbers at the end of the season, and you're like, oh, he had a pretty similar year over
Right.
year, but really he made up so much ground in September when
Yeah.
games really just at that point didn't mean anything.
Hmm.
Belly,
Hmm.
Swanson for most of the season until the end. And then when you're missing guys like Bellinger and Seiya, your two big
Hmm.
bats for a big part of the time. So those factors. And then one thing I want to talk about is Wrigley Field. Like
Yeah.
being there that year and seeing the way that it played, was that just weird?
It was weird, and like people don't want to hear it, right? But it's just weather's weird, baseball's random. You just kind of got to hang with them. And I don't. There's to me, there's nothing to be done with that
You can't.
information. It's
Yeah.
just the way it played. But look, the one component of Wrigley Field that I think gets blown out of proportion is the idea of the wind blowing out. Even at peak Wrigley, it doesn't happen very often. That's not like a thing that happens very frequently. And then this year, it just didn't happen. I mean, the Cubs played the Yankees in a 3-game series and no
No
homers
home
were
runs.
hit.
Yeah.
It was bizarre. So, I, again, I think that, if you're not going to get down with like the nerdy type stuff, I'm sure you're going to kind of roll your eyes at that, but it impacted their team for sure. I mean, statistically, they were a terrible offensive team at home. They pitched really well at home. I I don't know what to say. I think it was quirky and odd, but I would still. I think you have to go back into this year and assume that the place will play the way it normally plays, which is still erratic, by the way.
Yeah.
But last year it was so pitcher friendly.
So sticking on this topic just for a second, because you talk to the players a decent amount. What is it as fans? We say, okay, wind is blowing in. That should affect balls that are hit, near the warning track.
Right.
It shouldn't impact, if Dansby Swanson hits a double down the line. It shouldn't impact if a little, line drive over the second baseman's head with a runner in scoring position happens. But
Hmm.
for some reason, it did. Is that mental, or is there something that we don't feel as fans with these players on the field? Like, what were the players telling you of how it was impacting those kinds of offensive numbers?
They don't like to engage in, like opening up the hatch and saying,
Okay.
come on in, let's talk about like how I feel about this. I had conversations with guys. What I would say is you stick with your approach. The issue becomes when you're hitting a ball 110 with a 28-degree launch angle and it doesn't leave the park and it's supposed to leave the park, 96% of the time, that starts to get in your head. This
Yeah.
is a sport where one of the things they always preach is process, process, process. So, like, if you stick with good process, eventually the results will even out. And that's a myth, by the way, that it won't necessarily even out, that even 162 may not always be enough of a sample size for that stuff to even out. What I would tell you more than anything, though, is this, that in today's game, the way you score is by slugging. So
Yeah.
whether it's runners in scoring position slugging or just slugging, that's how you score. And that's what the conditions affect so much. It's slug. So it's not, it's not the 80s and the 90s, or 80s and, 70s and early 90s, whatever, but it's where, you're taking two and going to right or something. It's different. So it's about slug, and the conditions affect slug.
You are really good friends with Craig Counsell as we
Mm-hmm.
take a hard right on this. I just want to know, being friends with the guy, knowing
Mm-hmm.
him, a lot of fans, I think, were wondering, including myself, is year one for Craig just about evaluating, processing, sitting back and seeing, how this organization runs, and especially with the coaches that he pretty much was forced to have, as you've seen the big overhaul and a lot of changes are going to be happening there. Was there any part of you that was just like, yeah, he's just kind of taking it all in right now, but I expect him to be a lot more proactive in year two? Or is what we saw with Craig Counsell who we're getting?
I think what you saw with Craig Counsell is who you're getting. I don't think he was. I think that he would, any changes that he really actively wants to make, he will absolutely wrestle for. Um, I think that he's I think he's as prepared as any manager there is. Um, I would say he understands the connection between the front office and the field probably as well as anybody. Um, I I I don't know what the expectation was, for each individual fan, or what they thought was going to um, improve or be better. But I would say that this is how he runs it. I just I don't know what to say. I think that this team ended up winning as many games as it should have won.
Yeah. Well, and at the end of the year, right, he said this needs to be a 90-win team. And it was
Mm-hmm.
probably the first time outside of a particular bad take that was pointed out, that he got actually emotionally
Mm-hmm.
frustrated in front of the
Right.
media. Do you think, knowing Craig, that frustration was on himself, amongst the players, or the players that were given to him when he was kind of calling out, saying, like, we need to be a 90-win team next year?
I mean, look, Craig's really smart. He delivers messages. He does not. There's not very many times where it's like the button gets pushed. You mentioned trying to hit it in the lake, bad take. I mean, that was like a really rare instance. I feel like for the most part with the media, he's done a really good job of explaining, why they've done what they've done.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was just being matter of fact about it.
Mm-hmm.
He was being intense and he wants to win and he's competitive, but I also think it's just what he believes and he's delivering a message as well.
So when I saw that, I was pleased as a fan. I think a lot of fans were pleased to see that. I think the biggest thing that fans were disappointed in is that it took them till September, when they were already out, to get to that level of, like, you could use the word urgency, you could use the word intensity, like you said. Because when I look at 2024 and I compare it to 2023, in June of 2023, Dansby's having a meeting with Rossi and the guys and saying like, "Hey, we got to turn this ship around."
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in 2024, it was more like, "Hey, it's July, but we'll hit our stride eventually." There wasn't just that like intensity or urgency, and I think that was the big thing from fans was just like, "Hey, where is that?" And to your point, like I don't know that Craig's that guy, but we did
I would
eventually see
interrupt
that.
and say, like,
Okay.
look, I would interrupt you and I would
Yeah.
say, from the fans to the media, even like to to my position and the access that I get, the idea that anybody thinks they have any idea of when there is actually a sense of urgency
Mm-hmm.
is just false.
Okay.
Like that you're, doing Blues Clues or following the breadcrumbs in terms of like now there's urgency. It doesn't work that way in this sport, man. It's like even last year there wasn't, more or less urgency. I mean, I think that for Craig, it was just like, look, the players, like the guys who were not playing well, have to play better. That's it, and they all knew it. There's nothing else to be done. And the year before, they played better. I think what you, I think what you're misinterpreting is he wasn't frustrated. It's that by September, now you start to September, you're always, if you're not going to make the playoffs, you start to ask about going forward. You
Mm-hmm.
start to get asked more about going forward. And what happens is that even if you get asked that question in August, you're still messaging for this year. And what he did was he kind of gave into messaging beyond 2024.
Okay.
But like, it wasn't, there was nothing about, it changed nothing. And it certainly changed nothing in the clubhouse. I don't, so it's, I don't, yeah, I don't know what else to,
Yeah.
there's a funny, I would still maintain that there's an aspect, like I did sports talk radio for a long time. Um, and baseball is my love and it is my passion. And the most popular sport is football in our country, and it's not even close.
Right.
And I would say that the footballification of the way we analyze sports is such a disservice to most sports, but especially baseball. And I would further say, if the phrase sense of urgency were never used again, it would be just fine because it's just not a thing.
So dive a little bit deeper on that. Like where exactly?
Consistency is the thing.
Okay.
Consistency. It's today, today, today. And it's not try harder today. We really need to do
Yeah.
it today. It's process and like being consistent and delivering what you're capable of delivering. When they're not delivering what they're delivering, I know there's always a feeling and a suspicion and a thought, and we're reading body language that it's not as urgent, but it's always results based. Like the
Mm-hmm.
game I would still love to play would be to sit there when people read guys' body language and to go over clips, and then without knowing what the result is, having fans and media people tell me whether they're urgent, whether they were flat, whether they weren't motivated. It's like in baseball when they talk about a team that's flat, it's always a team that doesn't step on home plate enough, always. And so I don't, and I understand because people
Mm-hmm.
get frustrated and they see what they see and they take their emotion and they project it on to the situation. But I don't, it's not, this is not a pep talk type sport. Every once in a while, it can happen and then stories get told. But man, like, the other part that I would say is this guy, I mean, again, I've known him for almost 30 years.
Sure.
This guy's been one of the most successful managers
Absolutely.
managing year in and year out an under-resourced Milwaukee team. Like, he knows what he's doing.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, and just to be the devil's advocate, process is what you mentioned, but you also mentioned earlier that sometimes process over the course of 162 doesn't pan out, right?
Yes.
So when I think the things that come to mind that fans bring up this emotion of urgency, whether it's true or not, are, for example, Adbert Alzolay being run out there again and again and again.
Right.
And no try of a different guy. And it's not like he's Mariano Rivera with this track record. He had 1 year where he was a closer, right?
Because it's this, though. It's still this. This is the part that, like, you've got to and I know people will get frustrated on this. It's if you keep losing and then the dealer's showing 6 and you have 16, you're like, let's hit.
Yeah.
Because in that moment, Adbert Alzolay gives them the best chance. Like, from a based on past history, he's the guy in that spot. So, like, you want, like, what I understand it, but they're asking to just change the lineup. And the point is, are you trying to win today? Are you trying to do meaning if you go through all the processes and we're going to have a conversation. So before the lineup gets put in, you have to answer the question, okay, so you want to hit, it's like everybody wanted PCA to hit leadoff in certain spots. But it's like if we were to sit here and we put the lineup together, and now we're going to have this conversation. Do you think this lineup gives us the best? Do you think you can make an argument that this lineup gives us the best chance to win? What's your argument? What is your position for whoever you want to put in instead of Adbert Alzolay? And the problem is you're frustrated by what the result has been for Adbert, and you think not him is an argument, and it's not an argument.
Yeah, well, and that's
not good process.
No, it's not. And I think that as fans,
and I understand.
Yeah.
I understand. But that's not good process. Like that's I'm sure you get it, a lot in, like,
well, it's the same
Twitter
thing
or whatever, but it's not him.
It's the same thing we're talking about with Cody Bellinger, right? It's like, so many fans are like, oh, I wish you would have opted out. It's like, okay, then who's your number 3 hitter? Who's your number 4 hitter? Like, what's the other option? And yeah, it might have opened up some flexibility. And yeah, maybe you give a guy like an Owen Casey a shot, but then what happens when he's not doing well? So there are, to your point, I'm agreeing with you here. There are so many different dominoes that have to line up for there to be another opportunity.
The other thing is that, look, the sense of urgency thing, I understand from the point of those are the things that we default to when we can't understand why what's happening is happening. Why isn't Dansby Swanson playing as well as last year? And the answer is, I don't know. But people want an answer. And after a while, it starts to look like, does he care? I don't know if he cares so much. Are they feeling urgency right now? No, but I'm serious. That's what happens. That is absolutely what happens. But why is this happening? Why isn't this guy turning? And so you want the answer, and now we start to tell stories. We start to make stuff up. And again, but do you understand what I'm saying in terms of the Alzolay or in terms of the lineup? Like, those times when they're not scoring and he doesn't change the lineup and everybody's freaking out, why not just change the lineup? And it's just because it's why he's so good, is because, okay, we've just lost 13 in a row. Let's look at career, and let's look at what has taken place this year. Who do you want to hit the most? And then what it's going to turn out is he has the guys hitting the most who should be hitting the most. It's not like, hey, let's just take a flyer on, Ildemaro Vargas to hit in the cleanup spot or the third spot. I mean, just to take a guy not on the, but you understand what I'm saying?
For
Like,
sure. Oh, for sure.
so
there's a process,
and
there's a madness.
and I get it, but I don't have a solution for you, but he's doing it right, is my point. I mean, look, this is where I could suck the fun out of sports, and I'm guilty of it. But, like, it's this. I understand. For the people that are in on sense of urgency and you want not Adbert Alzolay, and you want to change the lineup, I totally get it. And it doesn't mean that you couldn't end up being right. What I'm saying is your argument and your process stinks, and we're not going to do it that way.
One guy is getting paid $8 million a year for his process, and then the other one is paying $20 a month to watch that person put their process.
I mean, I get it. It's emotional.
Yeah.
Look,
for sure.
One of his gifts is the fact that he doesn't get sucked into that.
Yep.
So I understand it, but it's just, I think this team, the part that's really hard, and look, you're on it. You know how good this team is. You are on top of this organization. What's really hard is that I would say they won just about as many games as they probably should have won last year. And I don't know how, you're going to have to subtract or do something funky in order to pave the way for the ability to deliver something that peaks at a significantly higher level.
Well, and then let's just ask that question in 30 seconds or less.
I'm sorry I yelled at you.
I feel very hurt. I'm holding back tears right now.
I'm hugging you.
No, it's with it being his first. I mean, he was.
I'm the worst at, but I'm sorry I keep cutting you off. The other thing I would say is this. They're not used to. He's placid. I mean, he also, by the way, can put on a show getting thrown out. But for example, the one that drives me bananas is arguing for Seiya clearly gets a crappy strike zone. I don't know what the reason is. I've tried to talk to some people in the league office. It's not like they're unaware. But when he gets pitches called off the outside edge of the plate,
right?
Craig can't see that.
No,
they can't see anything over there. So I don't know what the fans want him to do. And then the other thing I would say is it's another that stuff doesn't matter, man. Those guys don't want him to go out there and pick up a base and throw it somewhere.
Yeah.
They don't. They don't.
To the same point that you've had on air multiple times, I think Seiya is in the most control for that.
Yes.
To learn a couple English phrases of are you sure about that strike?
Yes.
He needs to start questioning that, just like
yes.
the Todd Helton
yes.
thing that you guys mentioned a lot.
Yes.
Well, one really quick question. Give me 30 seconds, then we're going to go to some fan questions and wrap this thing up. With this being legitimately his first full off season as a Cub, how much of a role do you think Craig will have with conversation with Jed about moves this offseason, or will he even have any?
Yeah. I would say he will. I mean, he doesn't have the power, but I would say that, look, in the end, what I think that they like and they're excited about is that he has it's another baseball ops person, and he understands the modern game, so I don't see them doing. I'm not saying it can't happen, but yeah, he's going to be in on what they're doing.
Cool. Can't wait to see. Fan questions,
Yeah.
brother. Let's get
Let's
to
go.
it. All right. Rojo Cube on YouTube says, Boog, do you like Tavern, New York, or Deep Dish?
I like Tavern, and then New York are kind of a tie. Not so in on deep dish.
Ooh, I'm a big
I
Deep
know.
Dish fan.
I mean, I'm also like, I'm trying not to think about pizza these days, man. You know, my body's a temple.
Treat it that way, brother. All right.
Mm.
Frodo plays 6996 on YouTube says chances the Cubs get Sasaki. We didn't even talk about that.
Yeah, I know. A chance. I mean, I feel like, you know, people are, I still feel like it's going to be the Dodgers.
Yeah.
Like that. Okay. So if somehow they were able to get him and like we spent the whole time talking position players, that's one that could potentially
Oh, 100%.
give you, you know, some win upside and a younger guy and so forth. I would say a chance. I would say a chance. I wouldn't put it as likely, but it's definitely. I mean, look, they were going and watching him and trying to build relationships. So, like, I would, yeah.
Based on all the information out there, if it's not the Dodgers, it feels like the Cubs should be just as much a second place team with
Fair enough.
all the next up, Goff 2144 on YouTube says favorite current Cub and past Cub and why. We'll turn that and into an or. Favorite current or past Cub and why.
I mean, I can't do a current, you know, like I can't really. It's not. But I would tell you that this past year, Shota Imanaga starting at home was unbelievable. I
Yeah,
mean, just
that's cool.
ridiculous. The one bad start against the Mets, and otherwise, it was just it was
Immaculate.
win day and it was energy, and he was so much fun. I just loved the dude. So that was a blast this year. My favorite Cub, I would say, would be Andre Dawson, just
Cool.
from my childhood, and then I got to know him when he was an assistant general manager. After he retired, he was with the Marlins, and he would travel a lot. And I just, as a player, he was so strong, athletic, powerful. Um, yeah, man, that MVP season, and then that I still get to see him. So there's an aspect of it for me now. It's personal. Like when I see Hawk now, I still get excited.
That's
And
cool.
like I've told this before, but one of the times he usually sings the stretch, you know, a couple of times a year, usually with a group and then by himself. But sometime in the last couple of years, where JD and I are in the middle of doing a game and it's like the sixth or something, and I get hit by like a paper ball, and then I get hit by another piece of paper, and I turn around and it's Hawk, and he's upstairs and he's giggling, and like all I can think about is like, you know, 13-year-old me is like, oh
Yeah.
my God, Andre Dawson's throwing balled up paper at me.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
That's
man.
awesome. Seems
Yeah,
seems like a legit guy. Um,
totally.
Hunter sent me an email and said, "Hey, what's your favorite memory at Wrigley, Boog?" It's a tough one.
Um, I yeah, I couldn't give you one. You know, remember I took over in like a weird spot.
Yeah.
Like you were like when I first started for home games, it was 10%. What 25% of fans were allowed in, and
Yeah.
then they had the full reopening day, and Rizzo had that 14 pitch at bat, and they came back against the Cardinals, and Bill Murray sang the stretch. That was pretty memorable.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I haven't gotten a chance to do a big game yet at Wrigley. I mean, in terms of for us. So I would say it'd be to be continued. I think a couple of the other ones would be my dad took me when I was like 12 and I saw Nolan Ryan pitch against the Cubs. My parents surprised me randomly when I was a Marlin broadcaster. My 30th birthday was at Wrigley Field, and it
Oh,
was
how cool.
amazing. I can't really say that I'd have one. The other part that I would say is the first year, June 2nd, where Lou Gehrig Day and the Cubs throughout this process and Marquee, but the Cubs like they've supported, me through Project Main Street and giving my buddy Tim Sheehy a lot of love. So that those would be some of the groupings. But I'm not. I can't sit here and pick one for you yet. I'm hoping I would really, I hope I get to be here a long time, and I hope we're sitting here picking our version of 2016 and then beyond multiple times.
I'm going to predict 2027. You'll be calling Game 6, and the Cubs will win it at home in the World Series.
God, that would be amazing. I mean, like winning at home. Holy cow!
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Ended with this. Natural Lawman 2965 says, I think of John Candy from Rookie of the Year when I think of Boog. He is too funny. I thought that was great. I love Rookie of the Year. That was one of my favorites. So
it's a great movie, and I love being compared to John Candy, or I get Chris Farley, or I get Seth Rogen. It's always the fat comedian. So I'm in. I mean, John Candy was brilliant, and in that movie, really, really great.
By the way, have you seen? There's a picture floating around on social media. Have you seen the photo of Seth Rogen without a beard and without his glasses?
I have not.
I'm going to send it to you. I still don't believe it's him. It's like Jake Arrieta sans beard. You're like, no, that's not the same person. That's
funny.
It's wild.
Yeah.
I'll send it to you.
Oh, I need to see it.
You're the man. I appreciate you jumping on, and we'll see you at spring training, brother.
Yes, with a sense of urgency. Love you, dude.
Love you too, bro. See ya.